people that are going to be here today. So I just have to say I'm very nervous. I'm nervous. I'm nervous before every presentation, but I particularly care about this topic. So I'm going to say a little bit about myself. Jade Barker, my bio is in the thingy. I live in Massachusetts. I've been a consultant with Colluminate, which is a co-op of co-op consultants for about 8 years. Before that, I had volunteered to serve on the board of my local food co-op, and it was a startup. So I joined in 2002. We opened in 2008. I became board president in 2010, and I won the National Award for Cooperative Board Service in 2014. The same year we won Retailer of the Year. So I'm very proud of our work. And it was not easy. So I was talking about trial by fire. It's like you get a lot. I got a lot out of this work, and I hope it's transformational for all of you. Although transformation does not tend to be comfortable. I may say that again throughout this presentation. So I'm part of the generation that was told that and learned in white spaces, if you talk about race, that's considered racist. So I was a head in the sand about racism person, probably till about 10 years ago, because I thought if I keep my head in the sand, I'm going to be okay. It's not going to hurt me. That was not true. So I finally gave up on that facade about 10 years ago, and I started taking anti-racism type trainings. It was kind of painful at first. I cried. But over time, I really started to learn that I didn't know all that I thought I knew about racism. I thought it was this thing that white people are doing to brown people, and they just got to get their act together. And then I was just like, no, it is way more complicated than that. It impacts all of us. And it's a story that we're all in. So I'm not going to say more about my personal story. If you want to know more, there is a pamphlet. I don't even think I put it in the resources, called Everyone Welcome, Food Co-ops, I didn't remember the title, and race, something like that, on the Colluminate library. And it tells a little bit of my own personal race story. But what I'm going to do here is, first I'm going to use a lot of slides. I want to say I threw the kitchen sink into this because I'm like, oh, I can't take that out. So there's a lot of info here, but the slides are going to be sent out to everybody, so I wouldn't worry about capturing everything. So what to expect from this session? After I did the session, I had to think, what are people getting out of this? And here's some of the issues. Consider why your co-op might want to be more diverse. I'm assuming you guys considered that. Learn some fundamental features of inclusion. So diversity and inclusion aren't the same thing, and I assume people here kind of know that. You could have a diverse group of people, but if we're all following the same rules we always followed and doing things the same way we've always done them, that's not actually inclusive. Evaluate your co-op based on these features and consider ways you can improve your co-op's inclusiveness. So I want folks to think for a minute. When you think about diversity at your co-op or your organization, I'm not going to assume you're all co-ops, what does that visually look like? Take a minute to think, just imagine in your mind at your co-op that it's more diverse. And conjure a picture in your mind. Does everybody have a picture? Some people aren't visual thinkers, I get that. So when you think about what it is from the mind, something like this? No, nothing like this. Anybody smiling in your picture? I hope so. Okay, good. So, but most of us don't necessarily think about this as being the outcome of diversity, but often, actually, we find that people have differing opinions, and in our co-op world, they're kind of vociferous about them. So I'm going to go through a bunch of concepts about inclusion here. And one is the idea of an in-group versus an out-group. So the sociologists developed these concepts, and it's actually seen in primates as well, that we have in-groups and out-groups, and we connect around concepts of we're in and we're out. And if you can think about your life, those people, us, it's just everywhere. And it is a way that a lot of our species connects, is around being different than these other people. So in this, so we envision we might have a big happy family, but truly our lives of work, school, not many things prepare us We're often in ethnocentric groupings. They don't prepare us for difference. Our culture doesn't do that for us. And that's almost a direct result of segregation, the legally enforced segregation that happened, that still impacts us today, that a lot of us don't really know how to maneuver across difference. So if we are going to have this in-group and out-group thing, why bother to be diverse? And so I'm going to ask you that question. Why do it? Why seek diversity? So if you have a neighbor, or don't have a neighbor, find someone, and I'm going to give you 2 minutes to talk about why you want diversity in your organization. So you can do this.
Go. Right. Hello. I'll sneak over here momentarily. Hi, I'm Dana. Nice to meet you. I'm in Chicago, Chicago the market. And I've been kind of following some of a lot of my guys have been doing so. I was sitting with a Pittsburgh fellow yesterday. Carlos. Maybe different. Maybe different. So our county is, we have about 14% Latino, and so diversity is important in my profession. I've worked for an environmental nonprofit in the county, and I'm on the board of the Food Bank. Our diverse community now has a lot of talent. We have these population centers, but we also have rural diversity as well, a lot of people in the farming community. So diversity is both cultural, but also that's economic, and different, the farming community is different from so I just
So 1 more minute, finish up your conversation.
It's, we realize that things we're probably doing are kind of obscuring the work of the county. And we're trying to figure out how to be like, that's just part of my heart. I like this, you're there, there, like this, like that. But it's also our Latino community, and that has left their sphere in connected and being farmers. So anyway, it's really enough for
All right, if you can close up your conversations and bring your attention back to the front.
Do we have 30 more seconds?
Yes. Good ask.
We also have like a huge refugee population. Yeah. Refugee organizations nearby. So there's like a giant Congolese population or a giant population that are coming to a completely different land with a completely different way of living and sometimes being able to find the food as part of their food traditions. It can be really real, really meaningful, and make them feel what their it's mine too. Or it's birth. So that stuff. But excited to talk to you more. Yeah. All right.
I think that was 30 seconds. Maybe a smidgen more.
We obviously want to talk a lot about this.
Well, and I'm glad, actually. It's one part about my work I don't like, is interrupting engrossed conversations, but unfortunately it happens a lot. So I'm glad you guys can continue to have conversations during, the breaks in the conference, and you're meeting new people, and that's really incredible. So what are some of the answers? Why do people want more diversity in their organizations? Anyone?
I think we agreed we wanted everybody in the community to feel at home when they walk in. Not just someone telling them they're welcome to come, but it has that sense and that this is for me.
And why do you want that? What do you get when you have that?
Just more strength in the community. There are more skill sets that the more people that feel at home when they're there will be sharing parts of themselves and in looking at things from a perspective that we've never thought of before, or the makeup of.
Does anyone else resonate with that answer? Yeah, someone else. And someone else wants to. Did you want to respond to?
Yeah, what we were talking about when I looked at my neighborhood,
the reason that we look at diversity is because each diverse person brings their ideas in because we think differently, and also because of money. Everybody doesn't have money. Some have money, some don't. So, yeah.
And so when you say money, because of money, could you say a little bit more about why?
Okay, so just as a co-opper, someone might say, well, I'll pay for this person because it's not affordable for a certain person, you know, or they might want to be a donor and donate money. So it helps. But again, like I was telling them, we right now are in a startup position and we're not black led. We were, but that person stepped down, and the two people who are with me are white. And we're considering them as chair and co-chair because I'm already over a big group of doing something else, and it's just a lot. But after being in the black led meetings yesterday, my whole outlook
blown up.
Yeah, my head exploded. I was
yeah, it really changed. I mean, it was almost like when I talked to other black-led people and I had told them what my situation was, they were looking at me, well, you're not in a black-led group. You know, I'm just like, right. It really opened it up for me.
Yeah.
I would say just to backpack off that, even though I'm not from I work for NCG, so I don't work in a co-op, so that's where my context come from. But I think a lot of folks believe that because they don't have the co-op open yet, that we can't create these things. But really, this is the best time because you can switch from everyone is welcome here to this space was created with you in mind. That transition of ideas that go into it. And so now, you know, once you open, you don't have to necessarily work on how do we, you know, do good DEI. It can be embedded. So, you know, you don't even hear that acronym because it's norm now. It becomes a practice before, instead of a program and a project once you're already open.
Thank you, Gabrielle. And I didn't get the names and co-ops of
Silverton Food Co-op.
so people can hear you.
Oh, Silverton Food Co-op.
And your name?
Beth Meyer Shania.
And
I'm Dorothy Wiley. Our co-op is Allendale Corner Store Food Co-op
where is that located?
in Shreveport, Louisiana.
Oh, sweet.
From the deep dirty.
My people are from Louisiana, so you wanted to say,
Yeah, I mean, we want to talk more, because Pittsburgh didn't even get to say anything. But we will. But I think in general, you know, we want our co-ops to reflect the community and the people who live there.
And what happens, what do you get when you have a co-op that reflects the community? Why would you want that?
You have a healthy community and it uplifts everybody. And, you know, again, yesterday it came up with the price point. You know, at some co-ops it might be more expensive, but there are food access programs, there are things you can do intentionally. Even access by public transportation is important, and we're thinking about all those things as we break ground later this year.
All right, thank you. I can see some very excitement to speak more, a little bit more. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Mari Gallagher, and I started out in my field as a community development practitioner and organizer. I now do a lot of different research and consulting projects. But when I was starting to share, when I was the executive director of the community development group, we considered ourselves a very inclusive group. We were in a community that was probably a third Black, a third Latino, and a third white. And then we also had a very strong, we had immigrants from a lot of places. So with that last 10%, a lot of people spoke Russian or they were from India places. But one of the things that our leadership, especially the Black leadership in our group, talked a lot about regarding diversity and inclusion, and they were leading this, was because we were very economically diverse. They were talking and pushing for more diversity among their own, recruiting more Black leadership and just participants of different income groups. And I don't know if diversity, because they were leading this, you know, and I was, you know, learning a lot from their discussion. But they were saying that because because there was so much economic diversity. This is a community like on the, what's called like the Chicago Liberal Lakefront, where there's like a lot of different kinds of folks, and they were like, they were really trying to work to be more inclusive of others that didn't have as many resources. They were fairly resourceful, so we were working on that. And I don't know that now's the time, or there's a time today to speak to that, but I was just curious about the different layers of diversity as we keep getting further into it.
Yeah, so I know probably lots more people want to speak, but I do want to move on with the slideshow because there's more of this. But diversity, what I've seen over time is people start to see as they dive in that they are already diverse in their groups. You start to see like, oh my gosh, I just didn't even know this person had this thing about them that was different than me. And that's where I see our organizations now, the ones I'm in, are not necessarily that inclusive, because we don't know things about each other and our diversity. And as I've been doing this work, I've been finding out more and more, like, for example, if you're from a poor background, what I've seen in middle class spaces is people from poor backgrounds don't mention it.
Shame.
But also you'll lose status. Oh, so I see that. So I'm the one who seeks out everybody and finds out their childhood story. So I know the deal. But I do that. I have to do that individually on purpose, just take them aside, and find out about their story. But anyway, so there's a lot of diversity that we're not capturing in organizations now, and that's a little bit of what I want to talk about. So I'm going to go on I had two topics generally that I thought. Well, the first one that attracted me was social justice. My first hearing about co-ops, I was like, everybody has a role. Everybody has a say. I thought that was the best model ever. And that's why I got involved in co-ops. And for me, that was about social justice. Like, we're all treated the same. We all have the same rights. We all have the same responsibilities. But there was another reason as I dug into it more in diversity, and some of you already spoke to this, was we get smarter organizations with increased impact and a greater ability to serve humanity. It's like, duh. I was late on that one. I didn't get that one right away. So I'm going to dive into a couple. The social justice one first. You all in this room are probably familiar a lot and looked at a lot of resources about racism. I pick racism as a race as a diversity because it's one that impacts all of us. Not everybody has all of the other ways that we're diverse that we can dive into, and it's really powerful, I think, and especially living in a racist culture, to learn more about the underpinnings of the system that we're in. And I recently was really, sorry about that, impressed by a podcast called Seeing White. I've got it in the resources later. It talks about the development of whiteness as a tool to divide, and to divide and conquer, and to have power for the powerful. So a white landowner could say to a poor sharecropper, white sharecropper, you and I have more in common than this black person, and thus divide and conquer people who actually had more interests together. So it's, it's done on purpose in this culture. We've lost track of how it started in whites here. We just accept now that race is a thing. And I did. I grew up thinking race was a thing, and I didn't know it had been constructed on purpose. The PBS Race, the Power of an Illusion has a bunch of episodes that also blew my mind. One, the creation of the wealth gap in America was news to me. Why is it that black people are so much poorer than white people? And then Cast, the Origins of Our Discontents. Isabel Wilkerson, I think she was a writer for the New York Times. She's an incredible writer, and she writes historical things with great depth and insight, and it's almost like a novel. So those are just some of the resources I found recently, but you can do anything. But to find out about why you would want to pursue diversity and inclusion for a social justice purpose, that's all out there. But the second piece is, for me, is so what happens when you invite diverse people into your group? And yeah, what happens when we do this? And so, let me see what I put next. Yeah, so it's not, when you do bring people who are different than you into a group, it's not necessarily comfortable. If any of you have been in a group where there's someone in the group who has a very different perspective than you, anyone found it difficult to like that person? Okay. So we're talking, I can't even remember. Yes. So why change our groups? Why become more diverse? You guys are already committed. That's why you're here. But I found this in the New York Times, though we may still idolize a charismatic leader or creative genius, almost every decision of consequence is made by a group. And so we want our groups to be smarter. So leading into the second part of how to be more diverse. is, so when we bring people different than us into our organization, we can either enforce our norms and stay the same, or we can embrace change. And I'm leaning on I was an enforce the norms person. I just want to be honest. And I've learned that no, embracing change is the way to go. Why? So I did some research on why some teams are smarter than others. And this did, for me, come down to inclusion. There was some research done about this, and they found that smarter teams are ones where the individuals in the team are able to read each other's emotions in their eyes. That's one characteristic. Another one is there's more women than men on the team. And the last one is they have a balanced sharing. So everybody in the group shares. I don't know if you, but when my first board of directors I joined, there were 3 of us that talked all the time. And I kept wondering, why are these other people there? Do they not have anything to say? What are they? And it wasn't until I became board president and created systems where we would do go-arounds, and I found out these silent people had a lot to contribute. They just weren't jump-in people, you know. And so some people in our culture might say, well, they need to jump in if they have an idea. And I'm like, well, some people just aren't like that. And we need to, and so we started to gather the intelligence of the whole group when we made an effort to have that balanced sharing. So this is a time to think about your own organizations. In your meetings, does everybody speak? Are people aware of each other's emotions? And do you have more women than men? So you get to have a couple minutes to talk about that.
We actually
That's very interesting. So I'm still, but I don't know how many are trying to, but I'm just saying, you know, one of the use of facilitator. So, and most of the black that they're in the breath of the community. And the reason why is my fault, and I know my neighbor is that because facilitator, but they never stepped up to say, hey, I'm going to want to be this because I'm going to be a part of what they do. Hey, how's everything going? You know, they want the information from across the street off the porch.
It's not the same as my nonprofit.
And we live, yes, a local contact. Yeah, I'll say about 99.5.
Others are.
Yeah, so, you know,
That needs to invite that.
Okay, I'll give you one more minute.
was a lot of older churches. I came to that community by way of her.
Okay, so if you can bring your attention back to the front. So I don't know if this came up in any of your conversations, but in my organization that I belong to, none of these things were particularly valued. In fact, they were counter-valued. Like, you know, the people who had a lot to say were the ones that spoke. Emotions were considered irrelevant, not important. And certainly men were more smart and had more capacity than women. So, you know, all of those things. So the culture that we live in actually highlights features that make us less inclusive. And so we sort of have to fight against that and learn to do it another way. And this is I've got some of insights. I'm going to go through some of them from some work on, it's called white supremacy culture. And I don't know if any of you have heard that phrase before. It's often considered white supremacy. People think of Nazis when they think of white supremacy. And I had a conversation with a white person at one point where I said, doesn't supremacy just mean like better? And don't you think whites are better? And he was like, well, yeah. So, okay, so we have white supremacy culture. In our culture, it's better to be white. So some of this work on inclusion has been done by people who are fighting racism. Because they were left out of the power structure, they really found ways that the culture that we live in actually works to exclude people, kind of on purpose. It's not, you wouldn't necessarily think it was designed that way, it's just what we inherited, but it's actually how it works. So this work is done, Tama Okun and James, I can't remember his last name because I'm having a senior moment, did some of this work. But I pulled out some of these features that I think our organizations have that I've seen the most damaging to inclusion. And this one, only one right way. Now, I was in school, I got really good grades and I was good in math and there was only one right answer. And I would fight you and argue, if somebody had an idea different than mine, I would just try to prove it was wrong. I didn't bother trying to think of how it might be right. So this is the thing that I've humbly come to understand, that there's actually a lot of right answers, and that it's kind of like the blind man and the elephant, where everybody has a slightly different perspective, and it's only when you bring all the perspectives in that you can really get to the truth. Because there actually isn't, from what I'm understanding, regardless of philosophy, the truth is elusive. It moves around. And so we're going to just be better off if we don't just think, and I still think I'm right, even though I know that there isn't one right answer, but I'm a little less grabbed onto it. I'm really open to like, oh, I see you're thinking differently than me about this. Tell me more. So being curious. Accept many alternate paths. There's not one right way to do this. And I've been working with co-ops now nationally for probably about 8 years. And I think, at least I was going to say you'd be shocked, but I should say I was shocked to see how many times I've worked with a board of directors where there's a person on the board that feels like they know the way to cooperate and nobody else does. It has to be done their way. And I'm like, this is kind of crazy, but it's really common, what I've seen. So, this is to consider if you see this one right answer and one, not accepting alternative paths in your organization. Is that a feature there? I'm going to go through a little bit more things from white supremacy culture. Non-inclusive organizations believe in objectivity. They're defensive and they like perfectionism. And so, if somebody doesn't get something right, it's like, the end of the world. And I had sort of my comeuppance about this was I was trained. I went to a pretty much all-white university and all-white high school, and when I was hiring for a job, I was a mediation coordinator, and I was hiring for a middle school mediator. And I would look at people's resumes that had a really nicely laid out resume that had really great language on it. I interviewed those people. And the people whose resumes were a little messy or sloppy, and certainly if it had a typo, I was not going to read that. And then I did an anti-racism training, and they said, are you scanning your resumes related to the purpose of the job? And I thought, this person is going to be talking to middle schoolers all day. Do they really need to have a great resume? And there was a woman that year that she had been a middle school mediator, and her resume didn't look that good. It would have been in the throwaway pile, but I was like, oh, look, she actually is the one person in this pile that actually has lived experience. And we ended up interviewing her. She ended up rising to the top of our list. The school loved her. We hired her. And she was Black and Latino. And so she was someone I would never even considered, based on the perfectionism. Like, oh, they can't, has to be perfect. So those are some features. And then the antidotes to these are these things, realizing that there are different worldviews and that these worldviews are all valid, potentially. Some of us may discover, like me, that I've been lied to about some things. There's some history that we may have learned in school that's just not true. Discuss and understand when you have a conflict, and acceptance. Accept that, sometimes you won't come to a shared understanding, but at least you understand where that person's coming from and you can see where it comes from. So this is, does any of you see any of these things that we've talked about in your organizations? One right way, answer, perfectionism, belief in objectivity. Anybody? Yeah, you're raising your hand.
I do see that in our group because, again, our facilitator, he's white. So if someone else is saying something, he'll say, no, we're going to table that, or we're not going to talk about that right now, because he talks a lot, but I believe he thinks his way is the right way because he has knowledge of, as if no one else can grasp it or get it. So, yeah.
We've always done it this way.
Yes. Oh my gosh, we've always done it this way. That's a surefire, yes. Question that. If that's the answer, we've always done it this way. Because likely, it's always been done this way. It's been in a way that hasn't been inclusive. That's just the norm for our culture.
And sometimes it's hard for him to accept others' ideas. He'll write them down and listen to them, but he'll say, we're not there yet. Yeah. So.
Yeah, and so I do have to say I've surprisingly seen that behavior a lot in the co-op land. And it's everywhere. I mean, I don't know if any of you have ever had a job. You will find there's people there, and I was taught to be that way. Hey, I know the right way, so we're going to do it my way. And I've gotten, certainly through my co-op work, a lot smarter. And I've seen this too as a facilitator. Oftentimes I'll come like, oh, I'm the person who's going to tell you everything, and then I find out someone in the room knows every single thing I'm presenting. So often it's smarter to just ask the room, what do you think? And then I'll give the answer. I don't have to say anything. And that's been more common than not in my work. So what happens in your organization when people make mistakes? What happens? So think about that for a minute. And I'd love to hear from some of you.
I feel like our board has a lot of grace for people. We all have full-time jobs outside the organization. Mm-hmm. It's a big ask for us to even have stepped up to be there.
So what happens, for example, if somebody fails to do something that they promised to do?
We find a workaround. We make it happen anyway. And someone else will step up, or we'll just say, that's just not going to happen at this time. We're going to refocus the goal at a time. But we don't really focus that negative energy on the person.
Yeah, we have the same thing, but usually it's people reaching out before then. So we talk softly among each other at first, one-on-one, and then we'll help each other.
Anybody else? Mistakes?
Well, yeah. I find that it's very similar to the Silverton model in that we'll reprioritize, we'll say, okay, that didn't happen, let's refocus. But what I find interesting that just sort of like popped in as I was thinking about it and listening is that there's definitely a reluctance for someone to admit, like there's still a feeling in the organization of guilt or shame that I didn't do what I said I was going to do.
Yeah.
And I think that concept, even if there's the grace that follows it, that to me tells me something about the culture of the organization that still maybe needs to change.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. And I want to move to my next slide. Blame, shame, and justification. So Edward Deming was a quality control expert, and he had a student, Marshall Thurber, who did some work around organizations and found that if blame, shame, and justification were present around a problem, there was a 94% chance it would not be solved. And so that has a lot to do with, and I did look this up because I was like, why is that? And blame, shame, and justification are actually about the past. They're about what happened, who did what. And actually, they're really rampant in our culture. The fact that people feel that shame, it may not even be your organization. You may just assume someone comes to the organization, they've been blamed, shamed before for being wrong. And that's something that's deep in a lot of us, of like, well, I didn't mean, or I meant this, or whatever the thing is. And to have an organization that's able to have that, yes, to err is human. And to be able to come back and say, so how do we face this? And accountability is still important, and I'm wondering why I put the accountability slide way after. So I'm like, why did I do that? So we're going to talk about that. But this blame, shame, justification clarification. I think you do have to check that things are getting done. That's important in an organization, but it's not valuable in any way, shape, or form to blame, shame, or justify. Yes?
We have had a situation recently, and a couple people just dropped off of the committee because, you know, we didn't follow through on something, and we're still going to be able to do what we wanted to do, but not in the purest way that these people wanted it to be done. So they're disassociating themselves. And, you know, you can look back only so much and, you know, pound your head, or you can keep up with being positive and kind and move forward and keep committed.
Yeah, and so positive and kind, you can still hold people accountable and be positive and
Yes.
kind. I mean, all of us, I remember when I joined Colluminate, I was scheduled to be on a call with someone, and I was, you know, looking at the watch at my time, and I went out and I did some gardening, you know, and then I got on the call, and I was an hour late. And so the person who'd hired me, who was mentoring me, said he wanted to talk to me after the call. And I just remember, you know, I was like, oh my God, my stomach was hurting, and I was like, oh my God, what is he going to say? So the thing is, the whole time I'm terrified. He calls me afterwards, and he says, what happened? And I said, I got the time zone wrong. And he says, oh my gosh, that happened to me. And he lists a couple times it happened to him, and then, you know, that's the end of our conversation. So what was great about that was I didn't get punished, but there was an acknowledgement that something happened. And I tell you, I rarely forget time zones now.
Yeah.
I do, but that was but I didn't get shamed, yes.
I wonder, in other organizations I've consulted with, we talk about adding that at the beginning, like talking about how we're going to handle things that if we don't meet a deadline or something doesn't happen, and talk about those 3 words, blame, shame, and guilt, so we know in advance what happened in that piece you said really stuck about being validated, you know, afterwards, like, yeah, that happened. Or say, yeah, that sucks, because it do. Like, using those words.
But you also want to know, I have been a party to, I work with a bunch of co-ops, and I've had talked to a board leader who would just say, you know, the directors, they don't read their email, they don't respond, blah, blah, and I would ask, well, what are your agreements about that? And she kept pushing that off. Well, they should read their, and I was like, well, but what have you talked about? So there ended up not really being clarity, and all she had seemed like after a while, like our 6th conversation of blaming them, I felt like, I don't think this person really wants, on some level she wants change, but on another level she was sort of unwilling to let go of that one right answer. Like there was a right way to deal with your emails, they're not doing it, and they weren't going to do it, honestly, until they had an agreement to do it. So that's something that I do see a lot in organizations. So
It's a great example.
yeah, it is. And so how are you going to fix it? And that's why you do have to have accountability, because like you said, people do drop off. If they see that your organization isn't serious about getting stuff done, they'll go do something else with their time. So when somebody agrees to do something and they don't do it, you need to address it, because otherwise you're not going to have an organization that's going to get stuff done.
I want to ask you something. I'm just thinking, so if your boss wouldn't have made that mistake like you did, wonder how he would have handled that. You know, I mean, he made the mistake because of time zones, but I'm just thinking, okay, if he had made it, would he have some other type of,
Yes. So I've actually never seen him blame, shame, or justify anybody under any circumstances.
Okay.
Now he is a tall white guy. So he walks through the world a different way than I do. He doesn't feel like he needs to do that. He's actually just a problem solver. I think he wanted to talk to me because he wanted to solve the problem, honestly. You know, he didn't want it to happen again, and he just wanted to get a sense of what it was, and we realized, oh, this isn't a problem I need to do anything about when we had the talk. So, yeah.
And then I'll add disappointment to that as well, that kind of partners with that as well. We had a small conversation on our way in, and those things were spoken about because some people dropped off that were supposed to be part of the group, and of course the president was very disappointed.
Yeah, so I do want to address emotions. We are humans. We are going to have emotions. And we are going to be disappointed. And so to me, I feel like that's a consequence of failing to do what you said you'd do. Someone's going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
And we don't need to hide that from people. You know, oh my gosh, you know, I'm really sad that went that way, because I was, you know, we had a whole chain of things that's following after that. So let's talk this out. Is this gonna happen again? Are you in the right place at the right time? How are you gonna fix this? You know, something to really actually address it. But yeah, so the emotions, I think, if we try to pretend we don't have them, then they come through anyway. Yeah, Sam.
I think around that though, I would want to name power and privilege in emotions, because I agree with you, and I think if we're talking about peer spaces and board groups where you're on a peer level, you may have the benefit of being able to let your emotions out in that space. But if you are interacting with your general manager or your staff are interacting with each other, there's different levels of dynamic, and there's ways that we could be dealing with the community. And so this is my perspective, this isn't like a research-based answer, but in my experience in a leadership position, if I do express my disappointment, that will be seen as a critique that I may not have intended, and that might be seen as you can develop a reputation around how you express your emotions in the workplace. I see a lot of dynamic in this it's not super straightforward to me, and it does hold a lot of weight, and I think we all have to walk into spaces and step back and say, how much power do I hold in this space? And if something happens, am I in a position where I do need to hold someone accountable? If I do, how am I laying all of this out, right?
Yeah, so I did not plant Sam here. But power is a really important consideration when you do express yourself, and I'm really glad you pointed that out in terms of the emotions, because we may or may not know how people see us in the power thing. I know when I became board president, I felt like I'd been a relatively popular director. People seemed to like me okay, and suddenly I felt like I was hated uniformly. And it had been a 24-hour experience, and I spent 5 months trying to figure out what did I do to cause people to be so upset with me. And in 5 months, the light bulb went off. It's like, oh, I became the president. And that's it, you know, that's what happened. And suddenly, like, if they're angry, where do they take it? They take it to me, you know. It was like, but it took me 5 months, so I'm sharing that time with keeping you having to go through that. When you're in a power position or perceived power position, that is the other thing. So a lot of our co-ops, we have like, oh, we don't, you know, we're flat, we don't have power here. Perceived power position, and that can be whiteness, it can be wealth, it can be maleness, it can be a lot of different things. And so to be conscious that you might be perceived differently than you see yourself, and that could have an impact on the interaction that you're having. So how does power flow through your organization? And I know some of you here are startups, so this might be a hard question, but I would love you to spend a couple minutes talking to somebody at your table of how does power flow through your organization?
The first thing I think of is like there are people who are first timers, and there are people who are more recent timers. I'm owner number 3, 7 14 members. But you know, there's not many people. As I'm thinking about this, I haven't really thought about those first owners are getting so you know, which makes sense in a lot of ways. They're baby kind of thing. But that's until that's driving, you know, sharing, projects, hiring. There wasn't necessarily anyone vote. Just somebody was hired, you know, they already knew that was a good choice or something. Not that that's a bad choice, but it's like when I think about power, I'm like, by somebody else, I guess. Well, we have a team, which anybody can be involved. So that's the other part. It's like you can volunteer to be on certain committees. And so part of that is you trust that other committee to make those decisions.
So there's the chair, internal.
Oh, right, and we just hired, yes, we moved from, working towards government. Yeah. So we're learning.
Right, so the person that goes
Yeah,
into this,
it's good.
he has the time and investment. So we're reference
So when I look at power, I'm looking at it as we have voice and we know what we're talking about and we know what we mean and we move forward, almost with a force like, and I know y'all have heard it, black power. You're not gonna stop what we believe or, what we're trying to accomplish in the system, so, again, like I say, black power, yeah, we gotta try to move this or do this or voice this or go forward in it and not be inferior.
You guys don't have organizations?
You know what it is? So, yeah.
Well, there's still power.
We would shut this over.
All right, just one more minute. All right, if I could get your attention back to the front, please. I know you may not have had enough time to finish up, but hopefully you've been thinking about how the power flows in your organization. So, would anybody like to share? I would really love to hear from this table back here, actually. Can you table in the front?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I hope you do continue these conversations. I was saying earlier, it's a hard part of my job, but how power flows through your organization. Can you share back there your name and co-op?
Yeah, my name is Galila. Our organization is Baby Hunters Point Community Advocates. We're a nonprofit that's interested in trying to start up a food co-op.
Yeah.
In terms of power flow, we have executive directors, we have management, we have, workers, interns, stuff like that. So it's definitely, I think we all try to feel like we're all on the same page, but obviously there's that hierarchical power structure. So like, my supervisor can make certain decisions I can't. Executive director obviously can make a whole bunch of decisions that I can't.
Where does your executive director get their power from?
The board.
Okay.
The board.
And who empowers the board? All right, well, I don't want to put you on the spot. Somebody else, how does power flow through your organization? Sorry, I see a hand behind you, and then you. Okay.
Well, I was just thinking about, we just had a conversation in the car on the way here of where our chair is a very enthusiastic guy, and he was talking about how he had presented a curriculum to some teachers within the last couple of years, and just did it really enthusiastically and was just so excited about the idea. And had the leeway of being like, if you guys don't like it, let me know and stuff, but come to find out a couple years later, the teachers didn't like the curriculum. They were like, we felt like we didn't really have a choice. And so he reflected upon that, and he was like, wow, I just never really thought about that. And he's a white man. I just never really thought about how I come across sometimes of being very enthusiastic and excited about things, and then, but also that creates a structure of, since he did hold a power position of people not feeling like they were able to speak up because it was like, oh, well, this seems like it's his way or the highway, kind of thing. And that was just a point of perceived power where, you know, you just don't always think about it.
And what about in your co-op?
And our co-op is pretty good.
Well, how does the power flow?
Right, so it's mostly board-centric. We don't have a ton of community engagement, which I would really like to see more of. I'm a pretty new member, I'm a new volunteer, and they've been very welcoming to me, but it's, also I know that I do hold my own intersections of diversity, and I'm a white woman and stuff like that too, so it's all a white board right now. We're in a rural community and stuff too, where that is more of the population, but there's still, I mean, there's obviously other outreach that we can do of like really trying to work harder and making it more inclusive and more diverse. And how does the power flow?
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, mostly. So people are pretty good about speaking up, but there are definitely some tendencies of where other people talk over. Yeah, I'm trying to, sorry, I'm just.
No, you're good. This is actually really, this is very insightful because I know when I joined the board of directors, I didn't think about that question.
Right. Yeah.
And I've now, after been doing this for years, I realize how important it is to have some clarity about it.
Yeah.
And I think most organizations, we don't talk about it unless it's a workplace where they've got it all worked out and it's all documented. And but part of when we're thinking about inclusion, having the question of like how does it flow is, I think, a meaningful question. And the gentleman who's in front of me here on your phone, you wanted to speak.
Yeah, we have a very defined structure, but we also, our decisions come from two sources. One is consensus, we make sure everyone speaks, and the other is people in the subcommittees, especially the subcommittee leader has, when they come to the board, they have a lot of power at the board because they're seen as the expert from bringing everything from that subcommittee. So like someone from the site selection or the business plan, they actually will, anything related to that or like promotions, they'll have sway and power in that.
Well, do you have a sense of the power flow though? I mean, like there's a direction of power. You're saying it's structured. Can you describe it?
Yeah, it's coming from the sites, it's coming from the committees into the board.
Okay, all right. Anybody else? Yes.
So our community, because it is being renewed, we have an organization there called Community Renewal International. So up under them, it's about renewing community relationally, economically, and socially. So as far as the power, how it flows through, we go through those renewal steps, making sure that, you know, we're doing it relationally, we're doing it economically, and we're doing it socially. So, and to me that's good because it keeps everyone on track and we all have something to say because we understand the agreement of what renewing community is about. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So thank you all who took the risk to answer this question. I've been finding through my learning that the more we ponder a question, the more we learn. Like if you don't know the answer, that's actually kind of good because you might be curious and you might look into it. So you had a comment?
Yeah, I would say just really quickly, thinking about this right now, I feel like the power is coming from the officers of the board, certainly. I am a committee chair, but I feel, I report on what that committee's doing, but I feel like sort of, the original owners who came up with the idea of the co-op too, I think, who are on the board, there's a lot of power there. So that would be my answer.
Thank you. So I'm going to bring up the idea of two kinds of power. There's formal power through the documents that you're given in your organization that say what responsibilities you have. And then there's the more informal power, which is some of the personal power that people bring. You know, that ability to be commanding, to be persuasive, to have wealth, whiteness, tallness, maleness, those sorts of things. There's that informal track. And the formal track and the informal track can be very different. So you might find even if formally in your organization you've got, so I know from my work with boards of directors that when you have an organization that has a board, the board has been empowered by the state to manage that organization. They delegate that power typically to an executive director. The executive director then delegates some of that power to people underneath them, and it gets delegated on down. It's usually through documents. The state, it's the bylaws from the state. If you have an organization that has members, the bylaws, the members have all the power, and they give it to the board via this document of bylaws. And then the bylaws specify then what kind of power the board has, and then the power distributes that. So organizations that may want to behave differently than that, like for example have committees be more powerful, which I would question that a little bit actually, you would want to formalize that. You want to talk about it, you want to formalize it, and then you want to know what the formal agreements are so that you can follow them. Because there's a word there, we customarily will follow the informal things. If we don't formalize, if we aren't clear about where the power flows, we will replicate the powers that are outside of our organization that we bring internally to them. I know when I first joined my consulting co-op, I was in a conversation with a white guy, and we were talking with some other people about a topic, and I prefaced almost every statement of mine with, I'm afraid to say this but. And so after about time 3, he said, I don't get it. Why are you afraid to say this? And I just kind of looked at him. It's like, I am the black person here, and I'm a woman, and I grew up on the wrong side of the tracks. So I just walked in with this, like, I can't say things or I'm going to get in trouble. So he didn't see that was there. It wasn't there for him. He didn't see it, but it was there for me. And I might have been, I'm a little bit, say things inappropriately. So I think if I was trained better, I wouldn't have even said I was afraid. And he would never have known. But so if you're not conscious and you're not clear about how the power flows, you're going to be replicating power, how it exists in the exterior culture. I don't think there's a way out of that. So think about that when you go back to your organizations, that this is worth having, and how easy would it be for a new person to participate. And I have been in tons of organizations where they say, or worked with them, or, oh, we don't pay attention to our bylaws, we don't do that, we do it this way. And I'm like, whoa, they like their way better. And I'm like, well, then just change the bylaws.
Yeah.
Do what you say you're going to do, because it's very crazy making for to get into an organization and say, this is how we do it. And yeah, we don't follow those pieces of paper. Like, whoa. Think how hard it would be for a new person to navigate that. So I'm going to bring up another thing about decision making. I get a lot of questions about decision making in my work. I work with boards of directors of co-ops and other organizations too, and they're like, oh, we want to see some more egalitarian methods of decision making, and they're looking into these different structures of consensus or weight or process, and I've seen a lot of different processes of decision making, and I have to say, to me, the process you use is just not all that important. This is my personal opinion. It just doesn't matter that much. What matters is the conversation that you have before you make the decision. And that you include everybody's voice, that you have some ability to gather diverse data, that people allow themselves to be changed by the conversation and influenced, and then come to a decision at the end. I've served on a board that was majority decision making. I served there for 14 years, and we had one decision that was not unanimous. So the type of decision-making process that you have does not make you more or less, in my mind, I haven't seen it, make people more or less democratic. In fact, I've seen more problems in organizations that use consensus than any other type of organization I've worked with. And I've been in an organization, I was excited. So I want to see how consensus really works. It was one of the most brutal organizations I've ever participated in. Yes.
Is that because there is such a push towards influencing and maybe converting opinions?
No, that's not how it worked in the ones I've seen.
Okay.
The ones I've seen, I call it horse trading. There's the person who's holding out and saying, I'm not going to approve this decision unless my little thing gets in there.
Oh, okay.
Or my value that I'm holding and nobody else shares needs to be reflected in this decision. That's what I see in consensus. In the ones I've seen in consensus, I'm not saying it may not operate different in other organizations. I'm just talking about the ones I've had personal experience with. Yeah. So I'm not going to criticize any type of decision-making process that you choose to use. It's your choice. But to me, what I've seen is the fact that people are listening to each other, they hear from everybody, and that they try to, so by the time you get to that decision-making process, whatever it is, that you've really had a good process that has elucidated everybody's thoughts and they've had a chance to be incorporated. Yes?
I just want to make sure I heard you accurately based on your experience. So you're saying you're more of a fan of a unanimous decision versus a decision by consensus?
Well, a decision by consensus is unanimous, right?
Not
necessarily.
Well, and I'm glad we're talking about it. I see consensus more as majority.
Oh. I've not heard that particular model, but there's a lot of them out there of decision-making models.
Yeah.
And all I'm saying, and again, I'm just one person.
Sure. No.
I probably worked with, I want to say maybe 80 boards of directors at this point, and majority seems to be easier. What I've seen is problematic is when people are happy to have like a 6-3 majority decision.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's problematic for me. It's like, and sometimes there are decisions like that, and they do. And they're troubling, and they're uncomfortable for everybody.
Right.
And sometimes you do get there, and I did see that once with an organization. But for me, it's almost a sign of you're just not doing quite a good enough job. But it might just really be, this one I think was around meat versus vegan, which is one that people have very strong personal feelings about. And they were making the decision on behalf of the organization, but their personal philosophies about it really were involved. And so that's a decision I think would be hard for any co-op to come to a unanimous decision about, but that ones that people have very, very strong personal feelings. But yeah, so most of the time I do see unanimous. A unanimous decision, it also isn't necessarily democratic either, right? You can imagine a bunch of people feeling like, well, the person who knows the most likes that decision, and I don't really know anything, even though I have qualms about it. In fact, I'll tell you a story. At my board that I worked on, it was a River Valley Co-op in Northampton. I would go to board meetings, and I loved going to board meetings. I'm a co-op geek. Although a lot of times they would be talking about stuff and I did not know why we were having that conversation. And I would sit there, and I was also the only black person on the board, and I would think, this must be a white people thing. Like they all seem they're participating, they all seem like they know what's going on. I'm just gonna I'm just gonna sit here and they'll do their thing. Well, when I became board president, I found out that we were dysfunctional. That there was no reason given for those conversations, and people just talked, even though they also couldn't have known, or they might have made up their own mind what we were talking about. So because I didn't participate fully, by saying, hey, I don't get this, why are we talking about this, we were allowed to be dysfunctional for a long period of time. So a lot of those decisions that happened then probably were because I was just like, well, that's their thing, I don't know about it. So anyway, so that can happen too, and that's why you want to have a process that you really check with everybody and define, are there concerns and that sort of thing, because you'll be smarter and stronger. So that's my whole thing on decision making. Again, whatever process you all decide on, but think about it. And also do think about the power. Because the concern I have about, I didn't catch your name, the chair of the committee having the power. I was in a committee where we had a person who wasn't the chair, they were the liaison with the board. And they ended up communicating to the board things about our committee that we never got to saw. They were giving written reports that we didn't know about. And the board ended up dissolving our committee, and we never really found out why. Because he was reporting to them his opinion about what's going on. And I still don't know to this day why they did that.
Yeah, we have at least one board member on every committee.
Yeah, and I'm saying that process, I have concerns about.
Okay.
If that person, are they authorized by the group to represent them? Do they only say agreed upon group decisions to the board? So I did just be questioning, and I think sociocracy works like that, so I'm going to be doing some more looking into it. But it does, because of my experiences, like one person has their one perspective, it does make me wonder, is that really democratic? So that's that. So I wanted to talk about one other thing that happens in groups, handling conflict. So, 2 questions. How do you handle conflict in your family boards, and then how do you handle conflict in your co-op? And they're there because I think they're related. Yes?
Just a clarifying question,
Sure.
may I?
Yeah.
Is that how we handled conflict when we were growing up, or how we handle conflict now in our family?
But when you were growing up.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm just not going to give you a lot of time for this, but I would love to talk for you to talk to. If you'd like, I don't know if you want to switch and talk to new people. Or if you're fine not moving, I don't know, it's morning. All right, so I'm going to give you 3 minutes or so to talk about this.
Oh, where are you?
Yeah, those encounters, speaking of
It's good if you don't think about it. Actually, you're all excited to do something healthy for you.
Are you the baby? Middle, okay, okay.
You left and to find a better space to be in. So that you're bringing it out.
Said that was wrong.
Okay, I'd like you to take 1 more minute. I know it's not a lot of time to finish up.
My growing up affected like things that I do know that's and so I'm a very diplomatic person, and I want things
Okay, everybody, if you can bring your attention back to the front. So I know that wasn't a lot of time, but the point of this question, can anybody guess the point of this question? Yes.
So, I shared in family of origin that we were quite dysfunctional when it came to handling conflict. But in our co-op, we've done such a really good job, and I think of like differing opinions. I don't think of it as conflict because people have differing opinions, and so we discuss the viewpoints. But I don't perceive of that as being conflict. I don't know. So we do a really great job in the co-op.
That's great to hear.
And then we were talking about, we never thought of how we handle the origin, family being what that means about how we handle now. And my thought is that, at any given point, we are a sum total of our journey. So we bring all of that with us in all the spaces that we go to. So.
Thank you. Yes, that's exactly what I'm looking for is most of us do unless we make a conscious effort. We learn how to do something a certain way and we bring it into the organizations that we're in. I was in a mediation center with a person who grew up in a loud Italian family. And she was very comfortable moving her hands around a lot and saying words in a very vociferous way. And so there were other people that were put off a little bit by that. So I do want to say that how we handle conflict can be really related to cultural norms. I stumbled across this book, Black and White Styles of Conflict, when I was a mediator, because I thought it was going to talk about conflict, but it actually ended up talking about styles, that the way people do stuff differently can create conflict. And so for an example, and it read true for me, that in white culture, people tend to be more indirect, and in Black culture, people tend to be more direct. And this has been true for me. I understand it, and now when I still say something, and I'm like, people are like, they can't believe I said that thing, and to me, it's just like, y'all don't talk like this. But you know, it's like breaking a cultural norm. Either way, it's breaking a cultural norm. Like for the black person to be frustrated, I had an interaction with a black colleague, and she was like, "You're reminding me of those white women I work with. You're passive aggressive and indirect." And I was like, "Oh yeah, right. I am doing it that indirect way. I learned how to do." So another thing is experts versus personal. I was in a relationship with a white guy, and he would be telling me how some psychologist said things were supposed to work in a relationship. And I was saying, I really don't care about that guy's opinion. What do you think? And this is really, and I learned that that was actually a part of my culture, that it's like, well, yeah, it's nice to know what the experts say, but I want to know you and me are talking here right now. So just to see there's a lot of stuff like that. And so some of the discomfort in people's styles can be cultural. And I do see a lot actually with white and black, and I've seen this in some boards I'm with, where someone will say, oh, he's being abusive. And I thought, he looked like he was being frustrated to me, you know? So there's that tension. So just to look into that in your organization, consider that there may be cultural differences around the way conflict, cultural difference in styles that cause conflict, but even cultural differences in the way conflict is handled. So I did leave this one for last. I don't know why this is so important in organizations. That when you have clarity about what you're doing and then you delegate it and you check, this is a great way to be trustworthy as an organization and trustworthy and inclusive, because somebody knows, it's easy to know what you're supposed to do and who's supposed to do it when you've clarified it. Any organization that you're in, any group of people should be doing these functions. They may not be formalized. You know, it may be just a casual, you know, if there's a smaller group of you, it's like, oh, did you get that done? But once you start to be more and more complex, you need to be more clear and specific about how you do these things in order to be inclusive. So somebody just doesn't wander in and go, I don't even know how y'all do anything. You know, so any comments about this? Yes.
In one of our breakout discussions, we kind of talked about this when we were going to the power piece. And in our co-op, depending on the outcome, what we're trying to achieve, that's how the power shifts. So if we're trying to fundraise, we have people on our board and in our co-op who that's their strength. So the power somewhat shifts to them. If we're talking membership and growing our community, there's other people in the co-op who that's their focus. So it shifts that way based on the common purpose.
Well, I would call that maybe more the informal, because each group should have its like clarity about this group does this group does that. Maybe you're paying more attention and you're following that group, but you know who makes the decisions based on, well, what is that committee, what are the fundraisers been told to do by the main group? Are they just making it up on their own?
Yeah, maybe I said that, it's the influence of the decision. The weight is heavier with people where their specialty is in that area.
Yeah, which is fine, but the power is still, that's influence. The power still would lie with the group, right? So people might be more influential, but they don't necessarily be the decision makers. So to sort of separate that out, there's that formal and the informal.
Yeah.
So, cool. So just, yes.
To go back a little bit about the justification part of where it kind of plays into this, of where I just wanted a little bit of clarification on that, because a lot of times, like, the personal guilt comes over me, and so I want to make justifications for why I did a behavior or something, you know. And so I just wanted to see what maybe if there was a difference between that of like not justifying my behaviors, and then also then though like being accountable for why I wasn't able to like say, you know, if I made a mistake or something.
Yeah, I think it comes down to the relationship of you and the person you're talking to. Because I don't want them to know that I didn't try and that there was a good reason I did this stupid thing. You know, I want them to know that because I don't want them to judge me. So, but if it's not, if the relationship isn't that important, like, like when I told my colleague that it was a time zone, that was my justification, right? But it also helped him develop trust with me about like, oh, that's what happened. So sometimes explaining what happened can be part of, the accountability piece. But when it's like, well, I did this because, and it's right, that's when it's like defensiveness.
Okay.
So but maintaining a relationship between people is important, and that trust is important. So I just had some of the resources. You're all going to get slides afterwards from this and have some of the resources that I mentioned. The drained swimming pool shows how racism hurts white people too. That's what that's supposed to say. Teens are smarter than others. I wrote so our co-ops are mostly white, now what? And then the Illuminate Library, we have a lot of stuff in there. And all these, you'll get slides after this workshop. So I think we have about a minute for questions. Yes?
I get when I'm thinking about our diversity, which we are not diverse, we're an all-white board.
Mm-hmm.
And I work for a nonprofit that is an all-white board. Building relationships that are diverse is so important. Like, I'm very sensitive about not being token. Like, okay, we want a Latino on our board, let's go find a Latino. No, like that to me is a very uncomfortable place to be. But, you know, building relationships, grassroots, knowing that we have a diverse community in McHenry County, you have to be very intentional and very patient. It takes time. So the co-op, same thing. We do not have a diverse board. It would be wonderful to have a Latino person on our board of directors as we start to reach out to diversify ownership and welcome everyone to be an owner. And so it takes time. It's really building relationships and going to those spaces where the diversity is.
Well, I hear you and I agree with you, and I want to say there's ways you can make the way you function in your organization right now more diverse and inclusive of the people who are there, because you can get a person. I was the brown person on my board for 14 years, and I found it, if I ever brought up issues had to do with brown people, they just landed with a thud. There was like, they weren't received. So it was like not, if I hadn't been used to that as a lifestyle, I don't know that I would have stayed there. So making sure that you have ways to include everybody now, and yeah, develop those relationships too. Because yeah, you'll get one Latino person, or one black person, but like there's Clarence Thomas and me, you know. Like,
Well, right. Yeah.
So
yes.
All right. So any other questions? Well, I do want to say that for me, this diving into this issue has been one of the most profoundly life-changing experiences I've had, and it's not comfortable to change and learn and grow. That's just a thing. It's not comfortable, but it can be exciting. And you can fall, you can skin your knee, and we all will fall into it, and you will have difficulty when you try to talk across differences and to learn that that's kind of the process. It's normal. It's going to be uncomfortable, but and try to, you know, take care of yourself in that process, because it can be humbling. I know some of the ways I discovered my own racism was humbling for me. And I actually spent a couple weeks actually after one incident really kind of like, you know, trying not to dive into the blame, shame, guilt thing and just go, okay, well, I was trained in this culture and I absorbed it and there I am and I'm just going to be different and do this thing differently when I can. But there's a certain extent that we're all enculturated in a racist culture. And just, you know, the sooner I think that most of us can accept that as our norm and where we're starting, the easier it's going to be to change. So, all right, thank you all for coming.